I got back from a business trip to find my entire family throwing a huge reunion in my house without me. They thought I wouldn't find out. They didn't just break my trust. They broke the one rule you don't break. Now, my brother's blowing up my phone, my parents are at my door, and they're all about to learn what happens when the family ATM closes for good. The drone of the highway was a familiar lullaby, a grain noise that vibrated through the leather of the steering wheel and up into my tired bones. For 3 days, I'd been in Chicago, navigating boardrooms that all smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. I'm a financial advisor, which is a polite way of saying I'm an architect of order. People bring me their chaos, their tangled portfolios, their panicked retirement fears, their shoeboxes full of unfiled tax receipts. And I build them a structure. I build them a plan, a future. There's a quiet, deep satisfaction in it, like solving a complex puzzle that everyone else has given up on. I bring logic to the emotional, frantic world of money. It's what I'm good at. As the city skyline receded in my rearview mirror, my thoughts turned to home. Not just the building, but the state of being it represented. My house. The word itself settled in my chest like a warm anchor. After years of paying off student loans, of living in sterile apartments while my friends were buying condos, I had finally built my own sanctuary. It was a modest, modern structure in a quiet Denver suburb. All clean lines, large windows, and a conspicuous lack of clutter. Every piece of furniture was chosen for its form and function. My books were arranged not by color, but by subject, their spines forming a neat, logical progression on the shelves. There was a single slate coaster on the polished coffee table, exactly where it was supposed to be. My home wasn't just a place I lived. It was the physical manifestation of my life's philosophy. It was my fortress against the messiness of the world. My phone buzzed in its cradle. A text from my older brother, Leo. Landing soon? Need to look at that pitch deck. Friday is D-Day. No. How was the trip? No, drive safe. Just a demand, disguised as a casual request. I sighed, the sound barely audible over the hum of the engine. This was the rhythm of our relationship. Leo, the charismatic salesman, the big idea guy, the one who could charm a snake into buying its own skin. And me, Caleb, the quiet engine room operator, the one who made sure the ship didn't sink when Leo inevitably tried to steer it into a hurricane. My childhood was a continuous lesson in this dynamic. I remember one specific afternoon when I was 12. I'd spent a month obsessing over an advanced mathematics exam, the kind with problems that had letters in them and felt like a secret code. I got a perfect score, 100%. The paper, with its bold red 8+ at the top, felt like a medal. I ran to find my dad, Mark, my heart thumping with a rare, fizzy excitement. He was in the living room, watching a recording of Leo's soccer game from the previous weekend. "Dad, look," I'd said, holding out the test paper like an offering. He glanced at it, his eyes barely registering the numbers. "That's nice, son," he said, his focus already drifting back to the screen. "Real nice." Just then, on the TV, a younger Leo, all flailing limbs and fierce determination, scored a goal. My dad shot up from his chair. "Yes, that's my boy. Did you see that, Caleb? Did you see the power in that kick?" I looked from the triumphant image of my brother on the screen to the perfect, logical, silent A+ in my hand. And in that moment, I understood. My victories were quiet, written in ink on a piece of paper. They were invisible. Leo's victories were loud, kinetic, and celebrated. My dad didn't want a son who could solve for X. He wanted a son who could score the winning goal. I learned to stop showing him my report cards. Instead, I learned how to build my own quiet world where my achievements mattered, even if only to me. Years later, that dynamic hadn't changed. It had just matured. When Leo wanted to launch a flashy but doomed-to-fail tech startup, my parents remortgaged their house. When I wanted to go to college for finance, my dad asked if I was sure I didn't want to do something more exciting. Leo got a brand new Mustang for his 21st birthday. I got a check for $500 and a firm handshake. But I didn't complain. I worked. I built. I took that quiet, internal engine that was good at math and aimed it at the market. And I won. Silently. I finally turned off the highway and onto the familiar, tree-lined streets of my neighborhood. The tension in my shoulders began to ease. I picture my routine: drop my bag, put on some quiet jazz, pour a glass of whiskey, and sit in my leather office chair, the one that faced the window overlooking the garden. Order. Silence. Sanctuary. I thought of the family dinner 2 months ago. My dad had been talking about his side of the family. You know, he'd said, we really should do a big family reunion one of these years. Get everyone together. A genuine warmth spread through me. That would be amazing, I said, my voice probably a little too eager. We could do it at my place. I've got the space now, a big yard. Leo had laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, just a dismissive one. Nah, man. Nobody has the energy for all that planning this year. It's a ton of work. My mother, Carol, had nodded in agreement, a placating smile on her face. He's right, honey. It's just too much. They looked me in the eye. They saw my open, honest offer, and they shut it down. I let it go, a familiar, tiny pinprick of disappointment. Just another quiet victory that didn't count. I pushed the memory aside as I made the final turn onto my street, my mind set on the whiskey and the quiet. The chaos was behind me. My sanctuary awaited, or so I thought. The first sign that something was wrong was the river of steel and glass choking my street. Cars, dozens of them, were parked on both sides of the road, bumpers crammed together, 2 wheels up on the manicured lawns. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was a retired librarian who considered a misplaced garden gnome an act of aggression. A party of this magnitude on her block was unthinkable. It had to be the Hendersons at the end of the cul-de-sac. They had 3 teenagers, which was an ongoing sociological experiment in noise pollution. I sighed, scanning for a place to wedge my sedan. My gaze drifted past the line of cars toward my own house, and my entire body went rigid. It was a full-body clench, a neurological alarm bell that screamed wrong. 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 There were people inside. Not just people. A crowd. I saw movement through the large picture window of my living room, a space I deliberately kept sparse and calm. A man I'd never seen before walked by holding one of my dinner plates, piled high with food. Someone else opened the door to my sub-zero refrigerator, flooding the room with light. The low hum of voices and laughter was a physical presence, a vibration in the air that didn't belong. I slammed on the brakes. The car behind me honked, a short, angry blare. My stomach dropped so fast I felt it in my knees. There were strangers in my house. My first thought wasn't betrayal. It wasn't even confusion. It was danger. The cold, analytical part of my brain took over. Assessed the threat. I pulled the car over a block away, out of sight, leaving my luggage in the trunk. I gripped my keys in my fist, the metal teeth biting into my palm. Maybe it was a horrible mistake. An Airbnb scam. A wrong address. Maybe a film crew had mistaken my house for a set. The explanations grew more and more ludicrous as I walked, my steps fast but silent on the pavement. A knot of pure dread tightened in my chest. And then, as I rounded the tall hedge that separated my property from my neighbor's, I saw it. Parked neatly at the curb, as if it belonged there, was my parents' silver Buick. Relief washed through me so fast it almost made me dizzy. Okay, not a break-in, not squatters. It's my parents. The dread loosened its grip, but was immediately replaced by a profound sense of confusion. For a single, fleeting second, I felt okay. They were here. It had to be okay. I crept closer, staying in the shadow of the hedge like a trespasser on my own land. I could hear the voices more clearly now. My mother's laugh, high and clear. My father's booming voice telling a story. And then I saw the banner. It was stretched across the clean, modern lines of my porch, a monstrosity of white vinyl and curly red letters. It was cheap, gaudy, and utterly alien. Family is everything, it declared to the world. And under that banner, the scene came into sharp, horrifying focus. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a robbery. It was a party. A full-scale, coordinated, catered family reunion. There was my father, Mark, holding court in my favorite teak lawn chair, a satisfied landlord surveying his domain. There was my mother, Carol, bustling about with a platter of what looked like her famous 7-layer dip, directing people through my house as if she were the host. And there, in the center of it all, was Leo. He was wearing a custom-printed t-shirt, a cartoon lion with the words Leo's Pride. That matched the shirts worn by at least 30 other people. He was grinning, laughing, slapping backs. He wasn't a guest. He was the king of the castle. My castle. They had co-opted my success. They had taken the physical symbol of my quiet, hard-won stability and turned it into the stage for their loud, chaotic celebration. A celebration to which I, the owner of the stage, the man who paid the mortgage and property taxes, had not been invited. I stood there, hidden by the leaves, and watched. I saw cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, helping themselves to beer from a cooler on my deck. I saw aunts and uncles sitting on furniture I'd spent months choosing. I saw their children running across the lawn I meticulously maintained. All of them invited. All of them welcome. Except me. No one saw me. I was invisible, just as I had been my whole life. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't march onto the lawn and rip that banner down. The analytical part of my brain, the part that had saved so many clients from their own emotional decisions, took the wheel. An analyst doesn't react. An analyst gathers data and forms a strategy. And the data was clear. This wasn't an oversight. This was a statement. I turned around, my movements stiff and robotic, and walked back to my car. The numbness was a shield, a welcome void where the agony was supposed to be. I got in, started the engine, and drove. The hotel was an anonymous block of beige concrete off the interstate. The kind of place with buzzing fluorescent lights and carpets that held the ghosts of 1,000 hurried business trips. I paid cash. The man at the front desk didn't look up from his phone. Perfect. Anonymity was exactly what I needed. My room smelled of industrial-strength air freshener and faint disappointment. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't unpack. I walked over to the window and looked out at the blur of traffic, the endless stream of headlights chasing red taillights into the darkness. I was a ghost in my own city. I didn't feel sadness, not yet. That would come later. Right now, what I felt was a cold, clarifying fury. It was the same feeling I got when a client would bring me a portfolio that was a complete disaster, a tangle of high-risk gambles and emotional buys, and then look me in the eye and say, I don't understand what went wrong. This was that feeling, but magnified 1,000 times. This was my life's portfolio, and I was finally seeing the catastrophic losses I had refused to acknowledge. I lay down on the stiff, starched bedspread, fully clothed, my shoes still on. I stared at the textured ceiling, and the memories started to unspool, not as a wave of emotion, but as a series of data points in a lifelong analysis. The memory of the math test surfaced first. The A+ in my hand, my father's dismissive, "That's nice, son," his booming cheer for Leo's goal on the screen. It wasn't just a memory of being ignored. It was a memory of learning what my family valued. Tangible, loud, performative success. My quiet, intellectual victories were, at best, a curiosity, at worst, an irrelevance. I thought about all the years I had tried to make my victories tangible for them, to translate my success into a language they could understand. I didn't just pay for my own college. I graduated without debt, a feat I knew my father, a man constantly worried about money, should have respected. He just nodded and asked when I was going to get a real job with a corner office. I thought about all the financial fires I'd put out for Leo. The $20,000 he lost on a can't-miss crypto coin that I managed to salvage by walking him through a frantic 3-hour damage control session at 2 in the morning. The time he co-signed a lease for a girlfriend who then skipped town, leaving him with the bill, and I was the one who negotiated with the landlord. The emergency loans that were never paid back. Each time, I stepped in. Each time, I was the fixer, the architect of order reimposing structure on his chaos. And I had told myself I was doing it, because that's what brother does. But lying there, in that sterile hotel room, the truth was brutally clear. I wasn't doing it just to be a good brother. I was doing it to be seen. I was trying to prove my worth in the only way I knew how. I was the reliable one, the stable one, the one who could make problems disappear. My quiet competence was my bid for value. And they had taken that competence, that stability, personified by the beautiful, orderly house I had built, and used it as a prop for a party celebrating the very brother whose messes I was constantly cleaning up. The party wasn't an oversight. It was the culmination of everything. It was them, in one grand, definitive gesture, telling me what my role was. I wasn't a cherished family member. I was a utility. I was a resource. I was the safe harbor they could sail into after their latest reckless adventure. A cold, hard thought formed in my mind, as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. A good analyst, when faced with an asset that consistently underperforms and yields negative returns, doesn't pour more capital into it. They don't get emotional. They divest. They cut their losses and reallocate their resources to something that provides value. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was an emotional, messy act. This was about a market correction. I had been overinvesting in a portfolio called Family for 35 years. The returns were in, and they were catastrophic. It was time to rebalance. It was time to sell. The next morning, I drove home in the sterile light of dawn. The street was quiet now, the ghost of the party lingering only in a few stray napkins caught in the hedges and the faint tire tracks on Mrs. Gable's lawn. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The house was clean. Too clean. The air smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and a faint, cloying whiff of burnt sugar from whatever dessert had been served. The cushions on my sofa were fluffed and arranged with a geometric precision I never used. My folded throw blanket was placed just a little too carefully over the arm of the couch, like someone had Googled how to reset a crime scene. They hadn't just had a party. They had erased it. They had erased me. I walked through the silent rooms. I saw a small scratch on the hardwood floor near the kitchen, a faint wine-colored ring on a wooden end table. The evidence was there if you knew where to look. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the clatter unnaturally loud in the silence. Then I walked into my office, sat down in my leather chair, and opened my laptop. The cool, silver machine felt like an extension of my own mind. It was time to get to work. First, I opened my banking app. My fingers moved with practice speed across the trackpad. I navigated to the Transfers and Payments section. There was a scheduled payment for the first of every month. Recipient, Mark and Carol Evans. Amount, $800. I had set it up 5 years ago, after my mother had made a series of pointed comments about rising grocery prices and the cost of prescriptions. It was meant to be temporary, a little help. But somehow, temporary had become permanent. It had become an expectation. I clicked on the transaction. The options were simple: edit, skip, or cancel. I pressed my thumb firmly on the trackpad. Click. A confirmation box appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? I clicked yes without a moment's hesitation. Then, I went into the transaction history and found the last payment. I edited the internal memo, the one only I could see. I deleted parental support and typed in 2 new words: portfolio divested. Second, I opened my work email. My professional life was a walled garden, separate from my family's chaos. Today, I was going to build the wall higher. I composed a new message. To Leo Evans, Mark Evans, Carol Evans from, Caleb Evans subject, discontinuation of pro bono financial services. The words came easily, as if I were writing to a client with whom I was professionally parting ways. Effective immediately, I will no longer be providing informal financial consulting, portfolio analysis, or any other related services on a pro bono basis. For any future needs, I would be happy to refer you to a qualified, fee-based advisor within my network. I have attached a list of 3 highly respected professionals in the Denver area. I wish you the best in your future financial endeavors. Regards, Caleb Evans. I attached a PDF with the names and contact information of 3 of my most boring, by-the-book competitors. Then I hit send. The email vanished from my outbox with a faint whoosh. It was done. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I felt nothing. A clean, quiet, empty space. It was the feeling of a spreadsheet that had finally been balanced. The numbers were all in their correct boxes. The red ink was gone. An hour later, my phone lit up. Leo, of course. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice intentionally flat. Hello. What the hell is this email? He started, no preamble. He sounded more annoyed than anything else, like I'd just been a minor inconvenience. Is this some kind of joke? I told you, my big pitch is on Friday. I need you to look at the numbers in the deck. The VCs are sharks. As my email stated, I said, my voice is calm and detached as if I were reading a weather report. I am no longer offering those services. There was a beat of confused silence. What? What are you talking about? It'll take you 20 minutes, max. Just give it a once-over. I'm afraid I'm not available, I replied. But the first name on that list I sent you, John Schiller, he specializes in venture capital funding. I'm sure he'd be happy to schedule a consultation. Schedule a... Caleb, what the hell is wrong with you? I have to go now, I said, and I ended the call. I placed the phone face down on my desk. The first asset had been liquidated. The next 2 days were a study in escalating pressure. The campaign began not with a bang, but with a whimper. A text from my mother. Hope you got home safe, honey. We missed you this weekend. The casual dishonesty of it was breathtaking. I read the message, deleted it, and went back to brewing my coffee. Then came the phone calls. My mother tried first, her voice thick with a manufactured sweetness. She didn't mention the party. She didn't mention the email. She talked about the weather. She talked about a new show she was watching. She asked if I was eating properly. It was a classic circling maneuver, trying to find a weak point in my defenses. Caleb, honey, she said finally, getting to the point. Leo is in a terrible state. You know, he gets so stressed with these big presentations. He's not a numbers guy like you are. He's always relied on you. That sounds stressful, I said, my voice neutral. Well, yes it is. He just needs a little help. Your father and I are worried about him. He's a grown man, Mom. I'm sure he'll figure it out. You're being difficult, Caleb, she said, her tone shifting from sweet to sharp. Family helps each other. That what we do? Is that what we do? I asked a genuine question. I didn't wait for an answer. I have a meeting. I have to go. I hung up. Next was my father. He didn't call. He sent a single, blunt text message, the kind he favored, as if paying by the character. Your mother is very upset. You need to call your brother. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The order a patriarch gives to a disobedient subordinate. I read it and put my phone back in my pocket. The real crisis hit on Thursday afternoon, less than 24 hours before Leo's D-Day. My phone rang, and it was Leo again. This time, the arrogant swagger was gone. His voice was thin, laced with a panic he couldn't hide. You have to help me, he blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. I ran the numbers myself. The projections, they don't add up. They look bad. The VCs are going to tear me apart tomorrow. They're going to see right through it. I took a slow sip of water. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate? Caleb, this is my career. This deal is everything. The commission from this was supposed to cover everything. He trailed off, and I could hear the ragged edge in his breathing. He was in real trouble, the kind of trouble he usually outsourced to me. What were you expecting me to do, Leo? I asked. I don't know. Fix it. You always fix it. You find some angle, some way to restructure the data, make it look better. That's what you do. And there it was. The truth lay bare. He wasn't asking for advice. He was asking for a miracle worker, an alchemist to spin his lead into gold. He had built a house of cards and expected me to be the foundation that would magically make it stable. My services are no longer available, I said, the words feeling more true each time I said them. You can't be serious, he shouted, his voice cracking. This isn't just about me, you know? Maria, the kids. This is about them too. What kind of person does this to his own family? That's a good question, Leo, I said quietly. You should think about that. I ended the call. A part of me, the old, conditioned part, felt a pang of something. Guilt? Pity? But it was drowned out by a new, colder feeling. It was the dispassionate clarity of a surgeon realizing a limb is gangrenous. There's no saving it. The only option is to amputate. That evening, a new message appeared. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. It had to be Leo's wife, Maria. I don't know what your problem is, but Leo is falling apart. I hope you're happy with yourself. His failure is your failure too, you know? It reflects on all of us. I stared at the message. His failure is your failure. For my entire life, they had made it clear that my successes were mine alone. Quiet, uninteresting, personal. But Leo's failures? Oh, those were a group project. Those were a family affair. I didn't reply. I just saved the message. More data for the file. The portfolio wasn't just underperforming, it was toxic. Friday came and went in a shroud of silence. I expected a storm of calls, a hurricane of recriminations after Leo's presentation inevitably crashed and burned. But there was nothing. The silence was more unnerving than the anger. It meant they were regrouping, planning a new line of attack. The attack came Saturday morning, but from an unexpected direction. An email landed in my inbox. The sender was my Uncle Robert. Uncle Robert was my father's younger brother, a retired history teacher and a quiet man by nature. He was an observer. At family gatherings, he was the one in the corner with a book, watching the chaos with a detached, sometimes wry, amusement. He rarely took sides. He rarely got involved, which made his email all the more significant. Subject, thinking of you. The subject line alone made my stomach clench. I clicked it open. Caleb, I'm not going to pretend I know the whole story, but I know enough. Your father called me yesterday, ranting about how you were being sensitive and unreasonable. I've been hearing that word, sensitive, used to describe you since you were 10 years old, usually whenever you had a logical reaction to an illogical situation. I felt sick when I found out what happened at the party. Maria, let it slip to your Aunt Jenny. We all just assumed you were out of town or working. No one thought to ask why you wouldn't be at a party in your own house. We should have asked. Your father's version of events felt incomplete, so I did something I'm not proud of. I asked Jenny to forward me a screenshot from the Family Fun WhatsApp group. I think you deserve to see the original prospectus on this whole venture. I hope you're doing okay. Best, Robert. My hand was trembling slightly as I scrolled down. There it was. A screenshot of a conversation from 2 months ago. A conversation that took place just days after they had looked me in the eye and told me no one had the energy for a reunion. Leo, surprise party/reunion kickoff. Plan is a go for the 15th at Caleb's place. He's out of town for that conference. It's perfect. He has that huge yard and the nice sound system. Aunt Sue, is that a good idea? Shouldn't you ask him first? My mother, Carol, Caleb won't mind. He loves it when the family is all together. He'll probably be thrilled he didn't have to do any of the work. My father, Mark, the boys always working anyway. It's good for his house to get some life in it. Leo, honestly, it's just easier this way. No arguments. Plus, his house is just better for this kind of thing. And he's so serious all the time. It'll be hilarious to see his face when he finds out. Leo, what's he going to do? Calculate his emotional damages? LOL. That last line hit me like a punch to the gut. LOL. A dismissive, 3-letter acronym that summed up their entire perception of me. I wasn't a person to them. I was a caricature, a walking spreadsheet, a joke. My feelings weren't real. They were a theoretical liability to be laughed at. I leaned back and closed my eyes. There was no anger left, no shock. There was only the cold, hard certainty of a final audit. The numbers were in. The independent review was complete. My initial assessment had been correct. In fact, it had been too conservative. The situation was worse than I thought. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was fraud. I saved the screenshot, not out of anger, but out of a need for completeness. Every good analyst keeps meticulous records. This was Exhibit A. They came on Sunday. I saw their silver Buick pull up through my office window, parking crookedly at the curb as if the driver had been arguing all the way over. My parents got out. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, conferring in low, urgent tones before marching up the walkway to my front door. They looked like missionaries coming to save a lost soul, their faces set with a grim, righteous determination. I watched them on my security camera feed, a small indulgence I'd installed after a package went missing. I let them stand there for a full minute, letting the silence stretch. Then I walked to the door and opened it. Caleb, my mother said, forcing a tight, bright smile. She was holding a canvas tote bag filled with what looked like grocery store muffins. A peace offering. We were in the neighborhood. Can we come in? No, I said. The word was quiet, but it hung in the air between us like a steel gate. Her smile faltered, cracking at the edges. My father cleared his throat, stepping forward to take charge. He was wearing his reasonable dad jacket a worn corduroy blazer he only put on when he was about to deliver a lecture. "Son, we just want to talk." "You're talking," I replied, my voice even. I didn't move. I just stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance to my sanctuary. They exchanged a frustrated glance. This wasn't going according to their script. "Look," my father said, his voice taking on a strained, patient tone. "I'm sure you've noticed that your mother and I, well, the monthly support payment didn't come through." I almost laughed. Of all the things they could have led with, an apology, an explanation, even a lie, they led with the money. They always led with the money. "There was no error," I said. "It was canceled." "But why?" My mother burst out, her voice rising. "Caleb, we rely on that. You know your father is on a fixed income now. And with all the money we've had to help Leo, we're in a very tight spot." And there it was. The entire rotten financial model of our family laid bare on my doorstep. I wasn't supporting them. I was subsidizing their support of my brother. My responsible earnings were being used as insolvency insurance for his reckless decisions, a debt they enabled and encouraged. "Leo has a six-figure salary, a company car, and a house in Cherry Creek that you co-signed for," I stated, the facts rolling off my tongue like items from an audited report. "My support was never about your needs. It was about patching the holes in your budget that you create by funding his lifestyle. Just like my house was a good venue for a party I wasn't welcome at." My father's face reddened. "Don't be so dramatic. The party was a misunderstanding, a poorly planned joke. Was it a joke when you lied to my face 2 months ago and said no one wanted a reunion?" I countered, my voice still level. "Was it a joke when you stood in my yard, in my chair, and presided over it like a king? Was it a joke when Leo laughed about me calculating my emotional damages in your family group chat?" They both flinched. The mention of the group chat was a direct hit. They knew I knew. "You're being so cold," my mother whispered, clutching her tote bag like a shield. "This isn't you. You've always been such a good, kind boy." I looked at her, at this woman who claimed to know me, and I felt a profound, bottomless pity. "You're right," I said, and the honesty of it surprised even me. "The kind boy you're talking about was a kid who spent his whole life trying to earn your approval by being useful and quiet. He was exhausted. He was taken for granted, and he no longer works here." I continued, feeling a strange sense of calm clarity. You didn't raise a son. You raised an asset, and you have taught me, through years of consistent action, that our relationship is transactional. So I'm finally treating it that way. And as a financial advisor, I can tell you with absolute certainty, you are a bad investment." "This is ridiculous," my father sputtered, his authority completely gone. "You're being emotional." For the first time, a small, genuine smile touched my lips. "No, Dad," I said. "For the first time in my life, I'm being rational." They stood there, blinking, stunned into silence. They had come for a negotiation, expecting to deal with the emotional, sensitive son they'd always known. They were wholly unprepared to face the dispassionate analyst. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it gently, the lock clicking into place with a quiet, final finality. It was the sound of a vault being sealed, the sound of a portfolio being closed. The aftermath was not a storm, but a siege. For a week, my phone was a constant barrage of their attempts to breach my walls. I didn't answer. I let them leave their messages, which I listened to once, as an analyst reviews data, before deleting them. My mother's voicemails were masterpieces of emotional manipulation, cycling through tears, anger, and feigned concern. "Caleb, I just don't understand how you can turn your back on your family. We've always been there for you. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. Is that what you want? To make your own father sick? I bake your favorite muffins. I could just drop them by." Leo's were less subtle. They began with rage, then devolved into pleading, and finally curdled into bitter resentment. "You ruined me. That was my one shot, and you blew it. You think you're so much better than everyone, sitting in your perfect house with your perfect money. Please, Caleb, just call me. I can fix this if you'll just help me talk to them. Help me restructure the numbers. Fine. Rot in your castle. I hope you're happy. I've probably got to declare bankruptcy now. I hope that makes you feel powerful, you cold-hearted bastard." I listened to each one, my own emotions strangely distant. It was like reading the frantic, panicked reports from a company whose stock was in free fall. Their desperation wasn't about me, or about family, or about love. It was about the loss of a resource. I was the emergency fund they had taken for granted, and they were shocked to find the account was empty. I ignored them all. I went to work. I went to the gym. I read a book on my back deck. I started to reclaim the quiet of my sanctuary. The silence in my house began to feel less like an absence and more like a presence. It was peace. On Thursday, my phone rang with a name that wasn't Evan's. It was my colleague, David. He was a senior partner at my firm, a man in his late 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor and an unervingly accurate read on people. "Caleb," he said, his voice gravelly. "You look like hell this week." "Long week," I said non-committally. "Yeah, I get it," he said. "The market's a bitch sometimes, huh? Listen, I'm heading over to the tap room. First round's on me tonight. Be there in 20. It wasn't a question. It was a friendly order. And for the first time in a week, I felt a genuine warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a simple offer of beer and companionship from someone who had no agenda, who owed me nothing and wanted nothing from me. It was an act of simple, uncomplicated support. "I'll be there," I said. That night, over a pint of dark bitter ale, I didn't tell him the whole story. I just said I was dealing with some heavy family stuff. He didn't press. He just nodded and said, "Family. They're the one portfolio you can't divest from. You can only rebalance it until it stops costing you your soul." I looked at him, surprised by the insight. He just smirked. "I've got 2 ex-wives and a son who thinks Bitcoin is a retirement plan. I know a thing or two about rebalancing." We clinked glasses. It was the most honest conversation I'd had in a decade. The weeks that followed were quiet. The barrage of calls from my parents and Leo slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. The silence felt different now, not tense but settled. It was the silence of acceptance. They had finally understood that the lines of communication were closed. Then something new began to happen. Other, smaller lines started to open up. It began with a text from a cousin on my mom's side, a woman named Sarah whom I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, Caleb, heard things got ugly. Just want to say what Leo and your folks did was disgusting. We were all wondering where you were at the party. I'm sorry I didn't realize the situation and say something then." I stared at the message for a long time. It was the first crack in the narrative that I was the sensitive, unreasonable one. I typed back a simple, "Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that." A few days later, another, this time from a different cousin. "Uncle Mark is telling everyone you've lost your mind, which, knowing him, means you probably finally stood up for yourself. Good on you. If you ever want to grab a beer and not talk about family, let me know." It was like a slow, seismic shift was happening within the family structure. The old power center, my parents' household, with Leo as its shining star, was losing its gravitational pull. People were quietly, individually, choosing a different orbit. The most significant communication came from Uncle Robert. He called one afternoon. "Caleb," he said, his voice gentle. "Just checking in. How are you holding up?" "I'm all right, Uncle Robert. Things are quiet." "Quiet is good sometimes," he said. "Listen, I wanted you to know a few of us are getting together for a barbecue next weekend. Low-key, just burgers and beers at my place. We'd really love for you to be there. No pressure, no agenda, just a chance to be, an invitation, a direct invitation, extended to me with no strings attached." It was such a simple thing, but it felt monumental. It was an investment from a new market, a healthy one, based not on obligation or utility, but on a simple desire for my presence. "I like that," I said, and my voice was steadier than it had been in years. "I like that a lot." The family dynamic was fracturing, but it wasn't shattering. It was reforming. It was rebalancing. The toxic assets were being quarantined, and new, healthier connections were being forged in the space that was left behind. 1 year. It felt both like a decade and a heartbeat. I stood on Uncle Robert's back deck, a bottle of cold beer in my hand, the smoky smell of the grill hanging in the warm summer air. The sound around me was a comfortable murmur of laughter and conversation. It was another barbecue, another low-key gathering. But for me, it was the annual shareholder meeting for my new, rebalanced life. I was no longer in contact with my parents or Leo. The silence between us was now a permanent, settled fact, like a mountain range that had risen up where there used to be a flat, treacherous plain. I had heard things, of course. The family grapevine was ruthlessly efficient. My parents had sold the big house in the suburbs a few months ago, the one they'd been so proud of. They downsized to a small condo across town. Apparently, their fixed income felt a lot tighter once my $800 monthly dividend and their own contributions to the Leo fund had dried up. Leo, predictably, hadn't stepped in to help them. He'd had his own crisis to manage. He'd lost his big job. The failure of that final pitch had been the first domino in a long, slow collapse of his House of Cards career. He had to sell his flashy car and his oversized house in Cherry Creek. I heard he was working a more modest, stable job in logistics now, a job that required him to actually be good at the details. The golden child's shine had worn off, revealing the cheap metal underneath. My cousin Sarah sidled up to me, handing me a plate with a perfectly grilled burger. "You look happy, Caleb," she said, smiling. "I am," I replied, and the simple truth of it resonated in my chest. "Things are balanced." She laughed, spoken like a true financial advisor. I looked around the yard. I saw family, but it was different now. These were relationships I had actively chosen to invest in. They were connections built on mutual respect and genuine affection. When I offered advice now, financial or otherwise, they listened. When I told a story, they laughed. My presence was no longer a utility. It was a preference. I thought back to that night in the hotel room, the cold fury, the feeling of being a joke. I thought about the confrontation on my doorstep, the final, quiet click of the lock. It wasn't an act of hate. It was an act of survival. It was the most important trait of my life. I had sold off a toxic, sentimental asset that was draining my spirit, and in return, I had gained myself. They accused me of calculating my emotional damages. And maybe, in the end, they were right. I am an analyst, after all. It's what I do. But I learned a valuable lesson that could never be captured on a spreadsheet. Sometimes, the only way to understand your true worth is to finally see the bill for how much it costs you to be undervalued. You have to be willing to close out the losing positions, no matter how long you've held them. You have to cut your losses and reinvest in what provides a real return. What's your bottom line?